Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to talk about teaching by not teaching, or how I help the adult student to rapidly progress at the piano, often by not directly helping them too much, part 2. And on this channel I hope to share with you strategies, mindsets, methods, and so on of my own creation that I hope will help you in your piano playing, hopefully other areas of your life as well. And this is part 2 because it is a continuation of a previous video where I talked about how by not over helping students, I am actually helping them, because by not directly giving them all the answers, by not just having them copy what it is that I'm doing, I am giving them greatly increased independence such that once they leave the room, either they physically leave the lesson space, they leave the Zoom room, or whatever it may be, they are able to do things on their own. Because what we're concerned with is whether students can do things on their own, teach themselves, get the value, get all the value of what the lesson originally was every moment of their own practice time, rather than whether they can execute the task just with me right now when they're depending on me, or whether they can do it within the next few seconds, right? I care more about whether they can solve these measures on their own a few hours from now, or a few days from now. Once the lesson's over, will they be able to play not only this measure correctly, but will they be able to teach themselves other measures of similar difficulty? Will they be able to solve problems of similar difficulty, and so on? So in this video, I thought I would just give 4 quick examples of how I go about doing this. So the first one is reading sheet music. And this is a very common one. So let's really be extreme in this example, and it's a very common scenario. Total beginner adult reaches out. Let's just say that they have had no musical experience, no music in the family. They have not sung before, not played any instruments. They have no idea how to read sheet music. They don't know the first thing about it. So probably a normal teacher would say, well, this is the treble clef, and this is G, or, they'll start explaining, they'll start diagramming out and showing them. I will just say, do these theory exercises, and I'll give the student some exercises to do. And it may be that I send them these exercises, or it may be that they're printed out and they start doing them. And I do not help them. It's as if you acquired these exercises on your own. You found a free resource online and you started trying to teach yourself, and I do not step in. So I just allow them to do the exercises completely on their own. They follow the directions on their own. They follow the diagrams and everything, because they are pretty much self-contained exercises. And then we just see what happens. And a lot of the time, not always, but a good portion of the time, the students come in and they have had no trouble doing these exercises, because a lot of it is meant for self-learning anyway. And so I learn a lot about the student in the course of this process. I learn, can they follow diagrams? Do they have any learning things that I should be aware of? Are they confusing right and left, treble and bass clef? Are they having any trouble perceiving the 5 lines and 4 spaces and so on? Can they follow directions? Do they have the traits of a strong self-learner already? And I don't judge, of course, if there's anything that isn't there yet, because then it's my job as teacher to fill in those gaps, right? So it might be that they have no trouble at all with the notes that are on the staff, but that they have trouble with ledger line notes, that they have trouble with extra high notes, extra low notes, and so on. And so then I just meet them where they are. I'll think, okay, well, this student had no trouble following diagrams, no trouble following directions, no trouble perceiving visual space, but it confuses them when they have to find extra high and extra low notes. So then I will fill in that information. And as I said in the previous video, the research consistently shows that because they were given the chance to get things wrong and then the gaps were filled in, they will remember that much better than if I just flat out gave them the answers. And again, that feels like it makes intuitive sense. If you take a math test, you get some answers wrong, and then the teacher says, well, this is the right answer and this is why it is the right answer, you're going to remember that better than if the teacher just directly told you the answer. You would just write in the answer. You wouldn't even know how it is that you got that answer if you're over relying on the teacher. But instead, the teacher is able to fill in precisely what it is that you didn't understand. The teacher also has more data on you The teacher's like, well, this person can do these things on their own, but they don't understand these things for specifically these reasons. So on a number of different levels, this is why the student typically will remember how to read sheet music much better this way. And we want to continue this sort of testing process. So when they encounter other theory exercises, when they start to really read their real goal piece, for instance, it is basically continued assessment. So actually, that's the second example, because we'll very soon, I mean, as soon as the student can read music, more or less, we will have them choose a goal piece. And let's say that the goal piece is Fur-Elise, right? The student, keep in mind, has not played the piano before. I mean, I may have them do some very easy beginner pieces briefly from an adult beginner book, more like a traditional beginner method book. But as soon as they can read sheet music and they demonstrate that they can play even basic coordinations, we make sure that if there's any egregious tensions, that they're relieved, that they have good relaxation and everything in their hands. Well, we're going to start the goal piece. And if they start Fur-Elise, the first thing I do is just leave them on their own. So they may acquire the sheet music, they find it on IMSLP or whatever it is, they print it out or they have it on their iPad, and I do not instruct them. I do not show them, here's where the right hand should be in the beginning. I don't have them copy me. I don't go over with them, how to find the sharps or how to find the black keys. I just leave them on their own. I do not teach them. And once they've had the chance to try some things on their own, then I'll come in and see what it is that they did. And it's quite interesting, again, because even without, they might have opened the adult beginner book, or they might have Googled and found how to play some of the black keys, for instance. Or maybe it turns out that they have somewhat of an ear for music, despite not having had any musical training. And so they've just deduced through what they remember hearing, maybe through logical reasoning, like, oh, I'm probably going to have to use a black key here. So that must mean that this symbol that looks like a hashtag or pound sign, this sharp, that must mean that we want to go to the black key slightly to the right. So again, by having them try things on their own, we learn, like, I learn, oh, this student, he or she is able to do these things on their own. And then, oh, this is the sort of person that has a good ear, or this is the sort of person that has the initiative to Google things or to look things up in the adult beginner book, or, right? So this person, I might learn other character traits about them that may really affect their musical journey. So I learn all these things about the student that I would not have had the chance to learn had I just instructed them directly. And shockingly, sometimes the student it's possible that they can even play both hands without my even instructing them. That's usually more rare, but if I had just instructed them directly, I would not have had the chance to know that. So in that hypothetical scenario, it may be like, wow, just by having them learn how to read sheet music without any instruction, this person's capable of playing both hands Fur-Elise already. That's a fascinating discovery. Now, if they have relatively more normal accelerated progress, I may find, like, oh, this student, he or she, they can play small sections in the right hand on their own without any instruction, but they're having some trouble with the left hand, or they're having some trouble with the bass clef. And it may be that they're a little bit confused about the accidentals, about sharps or whatever that come up. And so then I'll fill in that information. I'll say, like, okay, that's all correct, except that this is a D sharp because that's what this symbol means. Because before, let's say that they found D instead of D sharp. They didn't understand what sharp was. Well, now that I'm saying, like, okay, that's right, that's a D of some kind, but you also do have to sharp it. This is what the sharp symbol means. They normally will not only remember how to play that passage, but they will also remember the concept of the sharp or accidentals. They'll remember that much better than if I had just directly shown them again. So this is how students are rapidly acquiring independence. And then when they go to new sections, typically, again, I will not explain. Like, for instance, in Fur-Elise, there's a section where there are the sections where typically there will be, two treble clefs written in the score, or, there'll be hand crossing, like all these different things. And I think it would be more typical for a teacher to explain, you got to watch out for that section with the two treble clefs, because that's different from the beginning when there's one treble clef and one bass clef. And you got to watch out for that area where you play like left hand and then right hand and they take turns. I don't explain it. I do not teach it, so to speak. I just have them try it. And then I find that some students, they did not need explanation in order to get that part, which is really interesting. And I get an idea of the level of problem solving and the level that the student has and the level of help that they may need. And again, I always meet them where they are. I don't think any less of them if they could not solve it. I've had many very highly intelligent students that got confused by one thing or another, and that's totally fine. But you learn all the things that they can do, and then you can help them specifically with the gaps that they're missing. You fill in those gaps strategically, and then they'll remember those much better as well. Now, the third example is pretty different. How to use the metronome. I'm a big proponent of the metronome. I think when used well, it's an extremely useful tool. I have another video called something like, is the metronome good or evil? And basically, it's neither good nor evil. It's really just a tool. It can be used for good, used for evil. If you use it in the right way, it can be extremely useful, but it is merely a tool. So how do I get students to use the metronome? A lot of the time students will ask me, David, what metronome speed should I start with? And how do I use it? And maybe should I play one note for each click of the metronome, or should I play two notes for each click? And believe it or not, the first thing I'll usually ask the student to do is to just try it. And I do not give them an answer. I don't tell them the starting speed with the metronome. I don't tell them you should play one note per click, unless I genuinely think they'll be like completely stuck based on what I know about them. If I really think that the students like really way off in left field and I'm not going to see them for like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something, if it's some kind of special situation, then I might step in. But for the most part, I'm going to try not to interfere, so I won't tell them how to use it. I won't tell them how to match up. So they'll come in with their first attempt with the metronome, and I'll learn a lot of things about the student right then. I will learn, is this student able to listen to the metronome correctly? Like, are they matched up with the metronome at all? Or is the metronome clicking and they're just playing at like a completely random speed? Is this student able to choose a reasonable tempo? Like, is the metronome way too fast and they can't keep up at all? Or is it way too slow and they're actually greatly underestimating the speed that they can play at? Is this student speeding up or slowing down? Is this student making reasonable decisions in terms of how many notes for each click of the metronome? So if the metronome's going like this, and is the student playing one note per click? Is the student playing two notes for each one of these clicks? Is the student slightly ahead of the metronome or slightly behind the metronome? Is the student just like fluctuating? Right? So there are so many things that you learn about the student's rhythmic sense, their independence, their decision-making ability that you would not have gained had you just said, oh, play the metronome at, for instance, 90 beats per minute and do exactly this or do exactly that. So again, it's very useful data gathering. And then I'll say like, okay, well, your metronome speed choice was good, but you have a tendency to be a little bit ahead of the metronome and also this, right? So again, I can strategically fill in the gaps there. And because of this, students very rapidly acquire the ability to play with the metronome and to make good decisions around the metronome. In fact, in the future, when they choose new pieces, when they have new sections, often I will not have to tell them, I won't have to give them a prescription. They'll be able to prescribe things for themselves. And such it is with the Feel Release example I gave earlier, or if they chose another goal piece, they all usually acquire independence very, very rapidly. They'll usually be reading sheet music on their own very, very rapidly, and so on. And fourth example would be writing of fingering. And I don't talk about this that much in terms of how I help students to acquire knowledge of writing fingering. It's so simple though. I usually just do not help them too much, the same as everything else here. There are two main ways that I teach students to acquire fingering. It's not through doing lots of scales and arpeggios, although that could be useful a little bit into their journey. I usually do not do it right from the beginning. It could be an opportune time a little bit later on when they've acquired the ability to absorb information like that extremely rapidly because of learning my methodologies. But usually I'll either write out, this might seem contradictory, but if they really have no experience, they have no idea what they're doing, depending on the context, I'll either one, write out all of the fingering for a given section, and then just give the student that fingering, and then they can ask me, why did you choose that fingering? Why didn't you choose this other fingering? Like, what's your rationale for this or that? Or more likely, two, I'll just have them write out all of the fingering themselves. The only reason I go with the first one, so that you don't think I'm contradicting myself, is just in case I think the student's going to hurt themselves with a terrible fingering, or there are some signs, and this comes with just experience in teaching for a very long time. Just based on this particular student, I'll get a sense of, are they going to truly not be able to do anything at all? Because if they're completely helpless, that's not really desirable difficulty anymore. If they'll be just paralyzed, they can't do anything, or they're going to hurt themselves, if my internal sense is telling me that, then I'll write it in. But in all other situations, as soon as they've gotten going, as soon as I've taught them some technical concepts, as soon as they've had one or two examples of me writing the fingering, I will then start to have them do it on their own. And so they'll write the fingering, and then I'll critique it. I'll be like, well, this is reasonable because of this reason, but here you may not want to use 3-4, 5-4-3 too much, because that's not as strong a combination as 1-2-3, 1-2. Or there's no need to avoid the usage of your left thumb over and over, or there's no need to use a fingering where you have to jump all over the place all the time unnecessarily. And conversely, there may be times where, when it's not necessary to jump all over the place unnecessarily, but you also don't want to get stuck in one spot if it would help to move around a little bit, right? So there's nuance to it. There's no absolute you should always have everything in one hand position. It may be that it's helpful to shift around a little bit, and it could be because there's a specific technical reason for it. Maybe you end up using 1-3-5 instead of a weaker combination. And there may be times when the student is shifting around 5 or 6 times, and they just don't need to, or it's going to lead to, there might be other fingerings where it could be that the quality of the sound is better because of using a specific fingering. It could be that accuracy is better because of a specific fingering. It could be that the student's not taking into account enough the passages that are immediately before and after the area for which they're writing fingering. So all of this makes it seem like fingering is a very deep and complicated topic, which really it is. So, right, what's the best way to approach it? Is it through studying lots and lots of beginner books for years? Is it through studying scales, arpeggios, and so on? My experience has been, despite how complicated the topic is, it's not going to feel that way to the student as long as you have them write a lot more fingering on their own, and then you go over with them their choices and critique it intelligently and have a dialogue with them, especially if you're working with adult students and or more mature children. I found this to be way, way faster than the traditional way of going about things, because often the student is dependent on the teacher for way too long. So with even just working on one goal piece, if you have the student write out fingering and then you critique it, and sometimes you can critique it before they start working on the section. For instance, maybe they're working on section A, and then while they're working on section A, you task them to write out the fingering for section B, and you can critique and go over with them their fingering choices for section B before they actually start practicing section B in earnest. So, but it's okay, even if they start working on the new section. It's not the end of the world. You can still make adjustments afterwards. but they will very quickly acquire knowledge of these little different nuances just from having dialogues with you and understanding the rationales behind certain fingering principles. So this is the kind of thing, like if you read a textbook about this, it would feel very complicated, like reading a textbook about riding a bike. I like to use that example a good amount. Yeah, it is very complicated to achieve exactly the right sense of balance such that you can ride the bike, but really the best way to go about doing it is not to intellectualize over it. You just start riding the bike, and you learn from falling down, making those minute adjustments. It doesn't help to read the textbook nearly as much in that case. The experience is what helps. And for me, this is the same case with the fingering. By just going through real life examples, I will see total beginner and beginner students acquire not even the piano playing ability itself. I definitely stand by that. Students have gotten amazing results, but even here, just about fingering, like when they start working on a piece that's even much more complicated than their first goal piece, I'll frequently find that they need very little of my help. They've already acquired a lot of those principles of fingering because we've had so much back and forth about why I made particular decisions and why they made particular decisions. So yeah, so I hope that this has been helpful. I think that in this video, I'm really trying to speak conversationally the same way that I would if I were teaching an actual lesson. If it was kind of redundant, I think that that can only help, because as we hear the information repeated back in different ways, it's going to enter the brain. There's some spacing in between. There's some different nuance to each time that I'm repeating something. So yeah, so these 4 examples were about reading sheet music, teaching the student to play a goal piece such as Fur-Elise, using the metronome, and writing fingering, and rapidly acquiring independence in each through not directly teaching too much. Teaching by not teaching, in the sense of not over-prescribing, over-teaching, over-giving the answers right from the start. So if you found this helpful, please like, subscribe. Let me know in the comments, what are your follow-up questions? Is it confusing? Is there anything that you didn't understand about this process? And maybe you want some other examples, or there's something else in your teaching or in your learning experience that you're curious about in light of this idea. So yeah, looking forward to the next one.